that we have in. Got it. Okay, the food safety hazards that are applicable to all types of food products are biological, chemical, and physical. Biological are the most important because that's where pathogens may be in food and you cannot see them, taste them, smell them. Basically, they don't touch any of your senses. They're in there and you don't even know that they're in there. And they're so microbially small that you would never know they're there. Those are the things like the Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, Campylobacter, and dozens of others. And then there's chemical hazards, which would include like your cleaning chemicals or things that are used to like pesticides and herbicides and things like that, as well as any allergens are included in this category because of they create a chemical reaction within your body. And then physical hazards, these are the things you find in food that you really don't want to see, but they're not really going to kill you. You might have, lacerate your mouth. You might have some sort of issue, but it's not something that it's kind of like that yuck factor. It's like, oh, there's something in my food. With biological hazards, again, with produce, it could be in the soil, the feces that is associated with the growing. And then there's pathogenic viruses and parasites. The chemical, oops, I don't have this on. Let me go back to presentation mode. There we go. The chemicals that I had mentioned, that could be in or touch the product. And then the physical hazards. And again, the physical hazards could be things like, the wood, the glass, the metal. Some vegetables like leeks, I believe, are grown in sand. So if lightning strikes sand, it makes glass. And so that's sometimes you might find glass. Glass fragments could also come in through the manufacturing process, broken light bulbs and all kinds of things. And then there are those things that are part of the physical characteristic of the product. So like in some fruits and vegetables that we have, there's stones or pits or sticks or things like that may be in them. Or you may find an insect or part of an insect. And again, not that you want to see that, but it's not something that's going to kill you. And again, just to say that the FDA has guidance for the industry. I won't go through these principles. I think the basic principle here that I would stress would be that there's accountability at all levels of the agricultural environment. So this is farm, packing facility, distribution center, transportation, all the way till it gets to the last point of like the store where you're going to buy it from. So it's important that every single step along the way follows these safety rules and that qualified individuals are in charge of these types of things. And then just to let you know, through this part, we've kind of talked about, about FSMA, but starting next year in 2024, this actually began in 2020, the government has come up with a new era of smarter food safety. So again, they're always looking for how can we make our food even better and safer, going forward. So there's 4 requirements with the new era of smarter food safety. One is tech-enabled traceability, and that is going to be a major undertaking because not all computer systems talk to each other. So it's going to be interesting to see how this is going to be enacted in all manufacturing and everywhere where the food is, travels and goes to. We're going to also require smarter tools for approaches for prevention of any kind of food safety issues, and then making sure that with outbreak responses that there's a quick, actionable steps that are taken. We do what we can right now that it's, the best possible, and we do a pretty good job, but there's always improvement to be implemented. Another thing is the new business model and retail modernization, and those would be to make sure that the way that food is manufactured and operated is actually in a much safer or in the safest possible ways possible. And the last one is food safety culture, which kind of sounds whatever, but it's actually a very, very complicated thing to make sure that all of your workers and all of your executives at the company, everybody from the executive down to the last person on your employment list, knows what food safety is about and how they can help to contribute to food safety. So food safety culture is a really big buzzword these days. So Now that we know that the government is doing a whole bunch of stuff to make sure that we are eating safe food, and again, this was at a very, very, very high level, what are some of the things that we could do to understand food and understand food safety at home? Well, one of the things is to make sure that we educate ourselves and that we have an awareness. So we want to make sure that we know how to properly handle our food, how to store it, how to cook it. And then we always want to make sure that we're informed about what's happening in the food industry. So when you hear recalls on the news, do you have any of those products in your home? People that might be, um, at risk because they normally consume those types of products. And so, um, currently there's a recall on the apple cinnamon baby, those little pouches. I had a few of those at home for my little niece, and I lost them because I didn't want to have the chance. And that recall was because of high lead levels in the cinnamon that was used in those recipes. Okay, so 4 basic steps of things that you could do in your own kitchen. One is to make sure that, clean. That's probably the biggest thing. Always wash your hands. We have learned that through COVID that hand washing is ultimately important. So we want to make sure that, again, that's also a very important thing when we're cooking in our kitchens or preparing food. Make sure that the counters and your cooking tools and utensils and anything that you're using are also clean. And of course, we all know how to wash our hands, right? Now that COVID has come along and kind of drilled that into our brains. But again, we want to make sure that we keep things separate. So keep raw foods to themselves, keep cooked foods to themselves. When you intermingle those, there's a possibility of cross-contamination. When we cook foods, make sure that they stay hot. And we'll talk about the danger of the temperature zone in a minute. And then when you have foods that are to be refrigerated, make sure that you chill them right away. So this is how we protect, all of our loved ones and anybody that we're feeding from any kind of food poisoning or food illness. So how can you avoid some of these safety risks? And that's to make sure that you keep your foods outside of the temperature danger zone. And I'll show that in just a second. Make sure that you store raw foods below cooked foods. Store food in suitable covered containers so that we don't get anything that could cross-contaminate or get into the food. Avoid refreezing thawed foods, and then check and observe the use-by dates on food products. I'll give you a little bit more on that. And then take special care when you're handling high-risk foods. So again, we don't want to overpack our refrigerators because we want them to maintain a temperature of at least 40 degrees. And if you pack your refrigerator to like you can barely fit another thing in there, it could affect the temperature of the products that are in there. We want to make sure that we take safety precautions when you're loading your refrigerator. So we should be actually washing and rinsing fruits and vegetables before putting them in the refrigerator. I know I actually do not follow that rule all the time. And then, like again, with COVID, has taught us is to wipe down, plastic packaging and bottles with a sanitizing wipe, so that if there is some contaminant on the packaging, it's not going to possibly cross-contaminate something else that you're putting in your refrigerator. Let your leftovers cool before storing them, and don't leave them out for more than 2 hours. Move them into smaller containers, because another way that bacteria can grow is with air. So once it hits oxygen, it has the possibility of growing bacteria. So again, if you put it in a smaller container, there's less air or oxygen in that container, so less chance of it getting bad earlier. Make sure that we safely heat our leftovers to 165 degrees. Know when your leftovers expire. So usually in the fridge, it's 3 to 4 days. In the freezer, a few months. A good practice is to label them, especially if you're bad for remembering when you put those things in there. And, smelling it is not necessarily, what's the word I'm looking for? A positive way to know whether or not it's good. So again, as I mentioned, a lot of those things that are in there, you can't smell, taste, so on and so forth. We want to make sure that we correctly thaw foods. Don't take it out of the freezer and stick it on a counter. Make sure it's in the refrigerator for 3 to 4 hours per pound of food. Or if you're going to use cold water to thaw them, make sure that you have 30 minutes per pound of food and that you change that water every 30 minutes. So, freshen that water and then cook it immediately afterwards. Or if you thaw or defrost it in the microwave, make sure you followed according to those directions and then cook it immediately afterwards. I forgot to take that out there. Okay. Pay attention to code dating. So we have all of these things that say use by, sell by, expired, expiration, so on and so forth. And a lot of people get confused about those. So if it says expiration or if it says use by, that means it's a safety date. So don't consume it past those dates. Sometimes the use by dates can be confusing because we also have a best if used by. When it says best if used by, that is so that you are eating the food as at its peak quality and freshness, but it will last beyond that date. For sell by dates, those are dates that the retailers can have the item displayed for sale. The item will last beyond that date again. And as far as how long they will last, kind of depends on the product. I know this being a vegan group, you normally don't buy dairy products. Dairy products will probably go bad before, say, something like honey or mustard or, things like that last a really long time. Know the difference between cleaning and disinfecting. So cleaning is basically wiping off the grit and the grime and the dirty surface or whatever. Disinfecting is actually using a cleaner that will actually kill microbial spores that could be on your countertops or on your utensils or pans or anything else. So again, with disinfecting, you want to make sure that you use a food grade disinfecting solution. You could even make your own at home. You could probably look those up on the internet. I was going to share some of those with you, and I'm sorry I don't have those for you today, but things like using lemon and vinegar and things like that are some natural ways to do those. And then easy things are just get the whole family involved in cleaning the high touch surfaces, when they use them, and, again, to wash your hands. This is the food temperature danger zone. So I wanted to make sure just everybody understood that when you have to keep hot foods hot, they should be at, and I don't know if any of you cook on a Celsius scale, but I have both of them here. You need to have your foods at 140 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. So a lot of times when you're cooking something, it will show you on the packaging what to cook that at. And those cooking instructions are really to kill the pathogen or any kind of bacteria that might be in there. And then same thing with the cold foods. The cold foods, they should be held at 40 degrees, between 32 degrees. Anything below 32 is going to freeze the product. So between 40 and 32 for cold products, that's your fridge temperature. And then anything in between those two is your danger zone. So bacteria could grow rapidly. This is, this is where we say you could leave foods out for 2 hours. Beyond that, your products are going to get into this danger zone temperature, and then that's when the bacteria will keep growing. So if you're having a party or something like that, keep that in mind. So how long can you keep food out? Again, this is showing for hot foods, a maximum of 2 hours. And again, we don't want to let it to get below 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So you still have your 70 to 40. There's a 30-degree temperature there that you really don't want to. And then 4 hours if the product is refrigerated and it stays within that refrigerated range. With cross-contamination, a lot of things that happen with food safety happens in our home. And that has to do with cross-contamination. It could be on our clothing, utensils, pans and pots, and everything else that we use, making sure we separate utensils if we're using different types of products, cooked or raw products. Food handlers, making sure, again, our hands are clean, we're not contaminating the food or handling them with our hands. And then, of course, pests, which are probably more common if you're at a picnic or something like that. But those are the 4 common things. A lot of us go to potluck dinners, and one of the things is we can't control the food safety of how everybody prepares their food and everything, but here are some tips that can be used. So if you're actually preparing hot foods, you want to use chafing dishes, slow cookers, pressure cookers, steam tables to keep the potluck foods hot. You want to use ice bowls, coolers, or insulated dishes to keep cold foods cold. If at all possible, have smaller servings so that people don't have to constantly be going into like a large serving container to get stuff. And if you do have a larger serving container, even at that, if you don't fill it fully, but make sure you have like on your cold foods, have your backups in the refrigerator and just keep on refilling it rather than just leaving it out all that time. And then with the hot foods, make sure that you keep all the hot foods together in one section of serving, and then the cold foods together in another area of serving, because you don't want the hot foods to cool off more quickly because the cold foods are right next to them. And then, so along with your safe temperature controls, you could also help spreading food safety by making sure that there's plenty of serving utensils. Again, making sure so that guests aren't going to use the spoon for like all these different types of things. So make sure that they're separate serving utensils. And then, if at all possible, proportion it so that your one serving is, they just have to grab that serving rather than even go into any kind of container or anything. And then organize your station in a logical flow. So, put your appetizers and salads and those types of things first, then your main dishes and desserts. The last thing should really be the utensils and your beverages. So that's so you're doing it in a logical order, and then people aren't backtracking also. When you're eating outdoors or at a picnic, you want to follow a lot of those same rules as you would for a potluck. But again, you want to keep your cold foods cold. You want to organize your cooler contents, making sure that your coolers are in a shady spot if possible. And once you're at the picnic site, limit the number of times that cooler is being opened as much as you can, because when you open it, you're allowing cold air to escape. Again, the cross-contamination is also a factor on outdoor picnics. So again, we want to make sure we're, follow the same types of rules we do for the potluck. Make sure that you clean your produce before you bring it for anybody to eat, especially things like, if you were to say bring a whole watermelon and cut it on site, make sure that you actually kind of clean the outside of the watermelon, because once you cut into it, anything that's on the outside is now on the inside. So people don't usually cleaning the outsides of those types of fruits. Janet mentioned the thing about peeling an orange and not using your nails. Well, whether we like it or not, there's a lot of nasty little bacteria that gets under our nails just because we use our hands in so many different ways. So anytime you're using your nails to peel an orange, some of that bacteria could be getting in there. So I like the idea that you mentioned about using the tool for that. And then follow the 2-hour rule. If you do get food poisoning, I thought I would just list a couple of symptoms here. And this is, they actually kind of mimic the symptoms of a flu. And at this time of year, it could be difficult to determine. If it's a bacterial infection, it's something that's going to make you sick quickly after you eat it or within a couple hours after you eat it. You'll have this upset stomach, the nausea, vomiting, fever, headache, weakness, dizziness, things like that. If it's something that let's just say you had at a potluck or a picnic 2 days ago, and now you're 6 days later, typically that would be a pathogen like Salmonella or E. coli or possibly Listeria. So the important thing is to get rest. Eat things that are not going to further exacerbate, you know what I mean, make your symptoms worse. And basically, so you want to have things like crackers, rice, toast, and, kind of follow that broth diet. And then drink liquids and make sure you're using sport drinks to, get the electrolytes back into your system. And you might want to take some type of over-the-counter medications for the nausea or diarrhea. But if the symptoms persist, or if they're severe, or something that is very hard to tolerate, see your doctor. So don't wait to see the doctor. It may not be a foodborne illness, but the fact is it's better to be safe, especially if you're feeling that badly. So if you have a fever of over 100.4 degrees, if your diarrhea lasts more than 3 days, if there's blood in your vomit or in your stool, those are all signs that this could be a foodborne illness. So again, and you don't want to become dehydrated, because that could cause further problems as well. These are all times when you want to make sure that you do go see the doctor. So that being said, these are ways that the government and industry helps keep our food safe. These are ways that you could help keep food safe in your home. And now that we know about food safety, we can make some vegan pierogi. So anyway, I have a few, just 2 recipes here on the fillings, and then of course the dough. So do you want me to go over these recipes? Or I know that the link is in the thing there.
Yeah, if you want to briefly share the recipes, that would be great.
Okay. So the vegan pierogi dough is actually very simple to make. So it makes about everything that I did here was was for like a serving for 8. So you just have to double the recipe or triple it, for however many you want to make. But it's 3 cups of flour, or and then a little bit more for the surface, when you're actually rolling them out. A teaspoon of salt, a cup of hot water or warm water, and then 1 tablespoon of oil. So that's all that's needed for the dough. And then the instruction would be, you need a large mixing bowl. So make sure you want to use a sifter to sift together the dry ingredients. And then on a lightly floured surface, you want to um, put the flour on that surface and make a well or a hole in the middle. And that's where you will add small amounts of water at a time and then start combining them with your hands until you get the consistency of like a good dough. And if the dough is a little bit sticky, because it could get really, like where you can't get it off your hands, add a little bit more oil in there, and then knead it until it isn't as sticky and it's easily stretched. You want to set that aside for a little bit, let it have some time to rest, and then make it into a dough, and then cut it into 2 or 4 pieces so that you can roll them out. If you already prepared the insides, whatever you're going to put inside that pierogi, and by the um, way, I just have to say, as being a Polish person, pierogis is not a word. Pierogi already is plural. So I know in a lot of recipes it says pierogis, and every time I see that I go, but anyway, a pierog is a single one. Anyhow, that being set aside, if you're not ready with your ingredients for the inside yet, set that dough aside. But if you are ready, then you can start to fill them. So you would roll out your dough so that it's nice and flat, as thin as you could make it. You don't want to make it so thin that it's going to break through. You could use a cookie cutter or something that would be about 3 or 4 inches round. If you have pierogi press or one of those makers, that's great too. I know my my aunt always used to use like a lid from a coffee can or something like that to make them big pierogi. But you could use smaller ones as well. So they're you don't have to go out and buy a special implement to make those. Um, so you want to flatten them out with your fingers. You put the filling in the middle. You want to close them by folding that over. You might need a little water to seal the dough around the edges. There's different ways that you could seal them. You could use a fork, the kinds of a fork to seal the edges. You could actually fold them over. There's fancy ways to do this too. But make sure that they're pinched together so that it's not going to come apart. And so that's it for like making the pierogi. But now you want to put them in a pot of boiling water until the this says pierogi, until they float to the top. And then you want to boil them for another 1 or 2 minutes. And at that point, they're ready to eat. You could eat you could eat them like that, or actually you could use some vegan butter or a non-stick pan, and actually you could, put them in the fry pan then and cook them on each side until they're golden brown. So it's really your preference on how you like to eat them. And then you could serve them with whatever kind of sides you want. You could have the simulated bacon bits. You could use chopped greens like onions. You could put a little bit of dill on them, or some vegan sour cream on the side, things like that. So that's for the dough. I have 2 recipes here. One is for a cheese potato pierogi. So the ingredients for those would be 4 medium potatoes, where you're going to peel and cut those into chunks, a teaspoon of water, 3 tablespoons of vegan butter or vegetable oil, a half a large onion that is diced, 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast, 1 teaspoon of vegetal seasoning, or you could use salt, and pepper to taste. And then optionally, it would be 1 to 2 tablespoons of vegan butter or vegetable oil, a half an onion diced, and you could serve it with fresh dill or vegan sour cream with the potato cheese ones. And again, we're not using the actual cheese, we're using the nutritional yeast and that too instead. So that would be the ingredients for the vegan cheese potato pierogi. So again, with this, you're going to bring a large pot of water to a boil. You're going to add the salt and potatoes and let them boil for about 15 to 20 minutes. You could poke them with a fork, make sure that they're soft enough, but you don't want them to be like really overcooked so that they're mushy. So while those are boiling, you could heat the vegan butter in a nonstick pan and you can then take sliced onions and cook them lightly until they're browned and fragrant. I like caramelized thyme because it just gives it so much more flavor. And then you could turn off the heat and just set those aside. So once the potatoes are done, you want to take them out and drain them and mash them, and then add the onions and the vegan butter mixture, back to it. And along with that, you would add the nutritional yeast, the vegetable seasoning, or the salt and pepper to taste. So once you have mixed all that thoroughly, you'll have kind of like more of a salad type of mashed potato type of to it. So there you take your pierogi dough, and again, you're going to cut out your circles or whatever you're using as terms of shape, and put that as your filling. So you don't want to overfill them to the point where they're going to burst open, but you don't want to fill them so little that you don't really get the taste of the pierogi, if you know what I mean. So again, you want to make sure that you fill them adequately, but not overfill them. And then again, same as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's just, once you have that in the middle, you're going to, fold them in half like a crescent shape, and then seal those edges. You might need, again, the water to seal the dough. And then once you are done with the pierogi and they're sealed properly, put them in the boiling water until they float to the top, another 1 or 2 minutes. Keep them boiling. And then after they're done, you could take them to a pan and heat them on both sides. And what you could also do if you're going to make these ahead of time, you could leave them in the refrigerator for like 1 to 2 days. Or if you're going to freeze them, I would probably recommend what we normally do is wrap each one individually in like a saran wrap type of product, so that, and then we'll put so many like in a freezer bag, so that way they don't stick together. Because if you just throw them in the bag and throw them in the freezer, when you go to take them out of the freezer, they're all stuck together. That way, if they're individually wrapped, you don't have that problem. But you could also just let them thaw so that they don't stick together. But we just found that the better way of doing things is in terms of making sure that they don't come apart. The other filling that I have here is a vegan sauerkraut mushroom pierogi, and these are some of my favorite. I love sauerkraut. I also love mushrooms. In here, we would use 2 cups of grated white or cremini mushrooms. The other thing that I would also say is that you could use dried mushrooms. I don't know if you ever have tried Polish dried mushrooms. They're quite costly, but usually you could find them at a Polish deli, and we usually crush them up so that they're not as big and you have the smaller pieces, and then just rehydrate them in some water so that it can get to the soft texture. You could use those as well, and they're very, very flavorful. And then use 1.5 cups of sauerkraut. Make sure you squeeze the juice out of it, because if you don't, your pierogi will most likely fall apart, and because there's too much moisture in it. Use 2 tablespoons of vegan butter or vegetable oil, a 1/4 diced onion, and then salt and pepper to taste. So again, your optional ingredients here is another 1 to 2 tablespoons of vegan butter or vegetable oil, and then you could use simulated bacon bits, vegan bacon, or you could use, again, the green onions. You could top them with dill. Whatever your taste buds say. I'm sure there's lots of other variations here, but these are quite flavorful pierogi. So with the sauerkraut, what you want to do is prepare your mushrooms. This is like grate them with the cheese grater so that they're in fine pieces, whether you use a paring knife or whatever to dice them into little small pieces, that's fine. Again, if you're going to use the dried mushrooms and rehydrate them, what I normally do there is kind of crush them with my hands before I put them into the water, so that they're actually in smaller bits and pieces, so that you don't have to do that once they come out of the water rehydrated. Again, making sure your hands are clean, and then you want to squeeze out the juice from the sauerkraut and remove most of the moisture if you can, as much as possible. And then you want to take any sauerkraut pieces that might be too large. So sometimes you might get bigger pieces in there. You could either take those out and cut them up into smaller bits, or just kind of set them aside and use them for something else or as a part of the side dish. You want to heat the vegan butter in a large pan and cook your onions for a couple minutes. Again, here I like to kind of caramelize them until they start getting a little bit of brown to give them that extra flavor. What I also do at this point, then we'll add the mushrooms to the onions and let that cook for a few more minutes. And then I'll add the sauerkraut back into the frying pan as well, and I'll let that cook. You could add some salt and pepper at the point. Don't over salt. The sauerkraut has a tendency to be salty in the first place, so be careful on how much salt you add. You could even eliminate it and add it later after it's cooked, if that's how you want to handle that. But in any case, again, I like to cook my sauerkraut so that it's cooked pretty well. But again, it's a matter of taste. You could, make sure that it's cooked well. But sometimes, like, I'll let mine cook a little bit longer, so it kind of does the same thing with the onions and maybe kind of gets a little bit brown or starting to brown a little bit, and it gives it a little bit of extra flavor. And then once you're ready to fill it, again, same as we mentioned before, lay out your dough, roll it out, get your round pieces, put your serving in the middle, and then fold them in half and seal the edges. And then again, same thing, boil them till they raise to the top of the water and let them boil, for another 1 to 2 minutes. And then if you'd like to, you could put them in a nonstick pan and then again, cook them on each side until they start to turn brown. And then put whatever toppings on it that you would like. So those are making my mouth water because I love those. But enjoy, and thank you for your time, and I hope you found this really helpful. So, Carrie, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Carol. That was, I enjoyed the presentation, learned a lot. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. And we will be able to relay them to Carol and or Janet if you had questions for her segment 2. I'm going to stop the sharing if we can. Okay, perfect.
Carrie, I did see a few, there's, I think, 2 questions in the chat.
Oh, perfect.
If you want to check that.
I'm sorry.
They're directed for Carol.
Okay.
And one of them, they're both about washing vegetables. The question that I had was, when you buy, salad, it says pre-washed, triple washed. Do you still, knowing what you know, do you just take it out of there and put it in your bowl, or do you wash it?
I actually just take it out of there and put it in my bowl because I've seen the process and what they do to wash and triple wash them. So I feel confident that, unless something went wrong in processing, and that's unlikely, they're actually washed pretty well in the plant. So,
okay. And then I think one of the other questions that I saw came through is water good enough to wash our vegetables, or would you recommend something else to mix in with the water to remove pesticides? Does it matter if it's organic or not, different or the same type of washing?
Probably if it's organic or not. When you think about it, your vegetables and your fruits and things like that, they're all growing on the outside, so they're exposed to the elements. So whatever's in the air, whatever, we can't keep birds or bugs from living in their own habitat. So I would actually, wash them. And as far as to what degree, if you're going to eat the skins on something, I'd probably wash it more thoroughly than, say, something that you might peel the skin off of before you eat it. So it's just, knowing if you're going to eat the outside skin of whatever that product is. So, sometimes a little bit of soapy water and then make sure you rinse it well will actually remove a lot more of that, like possible pesticides and things like that from the product. But again, it's just making sure that you at least rinse it off to dilute or actually eliminate those types of things.
Okay, thanks. Carrie, did you want to ask, Carrie, do you want to read the insulated question? Insulated container?
So there's a question asking if using insulated containers to keep food warm, would you consider that safe?
Yes, because if you're using the insulated container, those containers are made so that they contain the heat. So that should be safe in order to keep it at the temperature that you're required. Of course, you don't want to keep opening it and closing it because then you're letting your heat escape. But the insulated containers are actually made for that purpose, is to make sure that it's kept warm or kept at temperature.
Okay.
Is there any other questions? Anyone else?
I think there's one other question. So, well, you kind of already answered the first part. What do you think about pre-washed vegetables? And then also, how fast do you react to food poisoning versus like the stomach flu?
Those are always hard things to mention. One of the things that like I do for companies is I do foodborne illness surveys. I actually talk to consumers to find out, because a lot of times people will eat something and they'll get sick, you know, half hour later and they'll say, oh, it's whatever I had for lunch that made me sick. Well, that could be true if it's bacterial or some other way that the food got contaminated. But if you, let's say, were eating, I don't know, some like a raw, high risk type of vegetable for dinner 2 nights ago, that then could be a foodborne illness. So again, when we're talking about pathogens, like most frequently talked about the salmonella and the E. coli and the listeria, campylobacter, all of those types of things. Norovirus, another one that is notorious for like buffet dinners and things like that, because a lot of people are touching the food. There's an incubation time, so it's not, you won't get sick immediately. So if you ate something that got sick immediately, it's bacterial, and that means your body's just trying to purge whatever is bad out of your system. But if it's a pathogen, it needs a host, which is your body, to grow and incubate. And then once it incubates, that's when you'll get sick. So it could be anywhere. And again, each pathogen is different. So some of them take about 24 hours before you would actually get sick. Some of them will take up to 3 days before you get sick. So a lot of times it's not what you ate right now or earlier today. It's what you ate 2 days ago, maybe even 3 days ago. That is what is making you ill. So that's why knowing those types of things would actually kind of give you more of a clue as to what or what may be making you sick. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, the symptoms are very similar to the flu. So you may have a headache, you're going to be throwing up, you have diarrhea, you might run a little bit of a fever. If you spike a high fever again, you want to see the doctor. But all of those types of things, they mimic flu symptoms. So a lot of times, how many people have said, well, I didn't go to work today because I had the 24-hour flu. Well, you probably didn't have the 24-hour flu. You probably had a foodborne illness of some sort, or bacterial illness, and you just have to get rid of it out of your system, and then you feel better. So, and most of us actually do that. I mean, most of us will get sick. We don't even know that we're getting sick from something that we ate. We kind of go through, what we have to go through, and then we feel better, and life goes on. So there are so many cases that are not reported. I mean, when I said 1 in 6 get sick, when you think about all the people who don't even report their illnesses, and I'm sure most of us have done that. It's kind of like, I don't feel good today and I feel better tomorrow. Okay, I'm fine. So
Yeah.
I hope that answered that.
Yeah.
I have a question about organic versus conventional. Can we trust when it's labeled organic that it hasn't been commingled, or like what are the safety procedures separating those? Because I've had people say, oh, it's not worth organic. How do you trust it? How do you know that that orange is organic and it's or just, mixed in different bags? I know they're labeled, but can we
Right.
trust them?
Well, basically, it goes back to, again, food law. And if you're going to label something, it has to be what it's labeled. If it's labeled to falsify what it is, that is, if the government could actually step in, like say you could report, to the government or to your legislator, whoever you want. You could go on the FDA website and say, hey, I bought this and it says organic, but I don't think it is. Well, they may investigate it and find that maybe a company is falsely labeling things organic, or maybe their processes, when you label something organic, there's again specific instructions and things that companies have to do to make sure that things don't get commingled and stuff like that. But if it does, there are fines, and they could actually shut down locations. They could take away their processing license if they're really a shady business that's doing that for profit only. So if it's labeled organic, you should be able to trust that it's organic. And again, there are a lot of new rules coming about as far as like traceability and how foods are handled, because I think things that have happened in the past were that, farmers would, you would like farm organic, and then they would pick up stuff from another farm that wasn't organic, throw the stuff on a truck. And even though they might be labeled, they may have been, touching each other or cross-contaminating each other. So things like that, there's more controls in place nowadays, so that type of thing doesn't happen. But, I mean, I can't vouch for everyone, but, like I said, there are specific rules about labeling. And if the industry is not following those rules, they can be shut down or fined or, put in jail, like in some cases, if it makes people sick. But that's, I mean,
Good to know. So the other question I want to ask you, I use this for my when I make little cookies. Is
Yeah.
this too big for a pierogi filling? Would you use a smaller amount? I think this is an inch. It's like a tablespoon, I want to say. Do you use something smaller than that? What do you use to fill them?
I use a tablespoon, and I do it by just judging by my eye, like, does this look like there's enough filling, or is it too, So I'm a terrible person to ask that, but and it's hard for me to tell online how big that might be, but it really is going to be how big your circles are that you're making pierogi. Some people make really small pierogi, and some people make bigger pierogi. So it depends on how much dough you're using in each pierogi, like how big that circle is that you're starting out with.
So when you fold it over, should there not be any air? Like it should be, you kind of have no air in it, right?
When you fold it over, yeah, I mean, you won't have that if you because the dough will like rest on top of it. But it's kind of like one of these debates. I always thought that my well, I won't mention anybody by name, but one person in my family always under stuffed their pierogi because it was like, okay, where's the filling? You got a lot of dough here. But you don't want to overfill it because then they might break apart. I don't know, Christina, do you make your own homemade pierogi? You're on mute. I'm sorry, I picked on you. Sorry.
I have made them in the past, and I've made ushka as well, the little ones that, and I just put them in, I eye it, whatever you feel like. Some of them I overstuffed and I try that, and some of them I understuffed. Trial and error.
Yeah. It's probably the same thing here. It's like I kind of follow what my grandmother and my mom did, and it was always like they would just use a tablespoon and kind of put it in there, see if it looked like, it was the right amount, might add a little bit more, whatever, and then seal it. So
cool. Well, I mean, pierogies are very similar to raviolis in Italian, and most cultures have their own little dumpling type foods. But some of the other recipes that I found that I thought I wanted to share, and all of the links, we're not going to go into detail, but all the links will be posted for you just to click on them, is cabbage rolls, which are very popular in a Polish household. And let's see, a creamy coleslaw. I found a video on how to make the cabbage rolls, and the stuffing, the filling, instead of ground meat, it's cauliflower rice, carrots, onions, mushrooms, walnuts, and celery and spices, of course. And then I also found some oil-free dough, and they use tofu as part of the filling, almost like a ricotta, if it was an Italian type of stuffing for a ravioli. So there is a way to make them oil-free for those of us who want an oil-free type of recipe. And I even found a gluten-free recipe that uses they use coconut cream instead of the butter, and they use egg replacer in the dough, and they use a tofu sour cream as an option that they made. And then there's a gluten-free chickpea pasta with a flax egg recipe. So all of those are very detailed for specific types of recipes that you may be looking for. And then I found an interesting one that purchased stuffed shells, and they put the pierogi filling inside. So used like an Italian stuffed shell, but pierogi. Polishized the Italian, so they combined the Italian and the Polish. My mom would like that because she's Italian and my grandma was Polish. So I'm gonna try that one time. And then a dried mushroom soup. As Carol said, that mushrooms are special types of mushrooms from Poland that you can order. They have a different, or you could just use any kind of dried mushroom. A variety is recommended. I have a Polish rice, tomato rice soup, a Polish dill pickle, and potato soup. And it uses vegetable broth, vegan sour cream. And you would just skip the vegan butter if you wanted to avoid that. And then a prune soup. I know Carol said prune soup is something that she, along with the mushroom sauerkraut soup, you said is something that your family traditionally had for Christmas Eve because it was a meat-free meal. And then today I found, thinking about apple strudel and making it with my grandmother when I was about 3rd grade, I found an oil-free dough, a vegan dough that's oil-free that makes small apple little hand pies, which I'm excited to try. It's from the Vegan 8 website. So I have all of those lumped together. Did you want to say anything about your prune soup and the sauerkraut and the mushroom combination?
I guess if anybody's interested, I could put together those recipes. These would be off the top of my head because my mom always called me a dump cook, but I learned from my grandmother, I learned from my mother. And in fact, my niece and I are going to be making the soups on Thursday for our Christmas Eve dinner, and we're making homemade pierogi on Saturday. But in any case, with the prune soup, it's really simple. It's just having enough water to cover the prunes and to actually use as your broth. So the water, you would just take your dried prunes and make sure they're pitted. So you don't want to have to be pulling the pits out as you're eating the soup. But just boil those until, again, like they will rise to the top. And I usually let them cook a little bit longer, but then that prune, it becomes like a prune broth. And then what I do is I keep that prune broth, but then I drain the, like I'll use a strainer and drain the prunes out of there, put them in a bowl and use an immersion blender and actually blend them. So it comes more like it's almost like a pudding or something. It's like very, very mushy, or like an applesauce, I guess, maybe. And then there, depending on how sweet the prunes are, I might add a little bit of sugar or like Truvia or something like that. But I'll add cinnamon in there and then put that back into the soup and then add I know for vegans, I'm not quite sure what a heavy cream would be to, cream the soup. And I'll add a little bit of salt in there too. But basically, it's a sweet soup, and it's actually very good. Most people, I don't tell them that it's prune soup because they hear prunes and they go running to the hills or something. But in our family, it's always been tradition for Christmas Eve. But it's a very simple soup to make. And then the other soup, the mushroom sauerkraut soup, has a few more steps. But basically, I'll take the sauerkraut and I don't rinse it. I put it in a pot of water and actually let the sauerkraut, again, come to a boil, cook it so that, again, while the sauerkraut is cooking, it's actually making the broth for the soup. I do then strain the sauerkraut from the water and separate that. I use that sauerkraut later on to make either the fillings for my pierogi, or I'll use it as a side dish and add the mushrooms to it for our dinner on Christmas Eve. But once I have that sauerkraut broth, then I take the dried Polish mushrooms. Again, I'll crush them up in so that they're not huge chunks of mushrooms, but they're like smaller bits of mushrooms, and add that to that broth and let that cook together. Sometimes I'll add, some cans of mushrooms to it or whatever, just kind of depends. I kind of taste it throughout as I'm cooking it to make sure it has like that sour flavor, but it still has the mushroom flavor. I'll add salt and pepper to it. And then at the end, again, I use something to cream the soup so that it makes it a creamy soup. And of course, then I'll use like the egg noodles that we'll add to it when we serve it. And if we want to, sprinkle it at the top with dill for those that want that. But that's really about it. But that one's more of a one where it's kind of like having to make sure you kind of taste, make sure you get the sour and mushroom kind of balance that you're looking for.
Yeah, one way to make a cream soup, when I do minestrone, I take some of the white beans and I blend them with some of the broth, and
Okay.
that becomes like a thicker, creamy, or you could do something like potato with soy milk, and that becomes your creamy mixture if you don't want to put flour. And rice flour is something that some people use too. But anyway, we've had a great time, I think, today. We had a glitch, so that's why we ran a little long. We lost a few people. I hope they come back and watch the recording. But I hope everyone enjoyed themselves. Carrie, do you want to I wanted to just something I forgot. Hibiscus tea is a great colorful tea that's healthful also, that you could put your citrus slices in. Make some hibiscus tea. It's a bright red color. Put it in a carafe on your table. Put some citrus, lemon, and oranges in it, and limes, and you'll have a great refreshing drink that's colorful and nutritious. So I wanted to share that with everyone here for their holiday refreshment. And you can put some sparkling water too in it.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So, thanks.
So thank you everyone for that. Thank you everyone that was here in person or that will be watching the recording and participating with all of your wonderful questions. We invite you to use the show notes with all of the quick links Janet and Carol put together for us, and those will be in the show notes of the recording once it's posted to YouTube. And we all encourage you to try something new, experience a new flavor, a spice blend, a recipe, or an ingredient that you haven't tried before. We're actually hinting, and we're going to be starting a challenge come January, all about trying new recipes and new flavors. So that will be coming shortly. But feel free to comment on the YouTube video and share what action or recipe or ingredient you decided to try and how it went. And before we say goodbye tonight, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our program for next month. So we are excited to welcome Deepa Deshmukh as our guest speaker. Deepa is a registered dietitian, and she has been recognized as one of the top 10 dietitians in the country for her innovative approach to health and wellness. She'll be presenting on the power of cultural foods and traditional cooking practices, and she'll share how food connects us from home kitchens to global tastes and binds us together in the joy of eating together. So that is going to be our program for January, and the date for that event is Tuesday the 16th. So we hope to see everybody back and invite a friend to join you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good holiday, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.